Ladies and gentlemen, you are now tuned into the Rate Limited podcast. This is the number one AI podcast in the world. And we do this because we benchmark ourselves and we make it true. My name is Ray Fernando, and we have Adam Larson, and we also have Eric Brovonche. And we are AI practitioners combined with over 30 years of experience in this industry. And we are cooking today with many different topics from Gastown to Opus 4.5, Codex 5.2, Kimi 2.5 just dropped. We have Pi Agent, Maltbot, ClawdBot, all these different things. And I'm so excited to have Eric go ahead and help us run the show. Eric, what's going on, man?
Hey, yeah, it's good to see you all. It's been a couple of weeks. Never sleeps in the world of AI agents. So, last time we talked a little bit about our thoughts on working with Claude or Codex. So I just wanted to come back on that because, it's been another couple of weeks. The Codex model is now dropped in different harnesses. So I wanted to get, just like a new fresh perspective on how we're feeling about these models, where we're at, what is like your daily runners. I find it's important to kind of get on top of that. So why don't you start us off, Ray? Tell us what are you running right now and what model is it and why is it Codex?
Yeah, so I've been kind of using 4.5 and Codex 5.2. And just as a disclaimer, Cursor has given me a bunch of credits to do a lot of research on their behalf and also give them tons and tons of feedback and kind of be like sort of like a research engineer. And so I've been sort of living inside of Cursor for a while and kind of going a little crazy with Codex 5.2. And the preferred model I like to choose is the extra high one, extra fast. And what I find is the thoroughness and the code completion, because I found that Opus 4.5 is really good at like kind of convincing me that the code is done. And then I would get these small hints that something was just kind of missing in my actual feature documentation. And I'm extremely religious about taking a big plan and then trying to cut it down to these smaller chats and smaller things. So usually one chat will have one task. But I still found it surprising that Opus 4.5, while it would show me that it did things, it didn't really think through the entire chain of things. And so with Codex 5.2, I found that it was extra thorough, and it also spent a little bit more time thinking through like the architecture as a whole and saying, hey, you actually have other stuff that you already have in your code base for this. It was kind of unprompted. It's like, we should just go ahead and use that. And, I found that Opus still liked to create more files and more functions and more everything. And so that was, now I just kind of create my plans in Opus 4.5 and just tell Codex to do everything. I'm at a point where I'm just probably just want to do Codex for everything. I'm trying to get used to the talking to the model. And I feel like talking to Codex and producing plans didn't look as nice and readable to me. I like a lot of details in my plans. So that way I can kind of reason over them as a human. Maybe it's just for me, but I don't know. I feel like maybe the agents can do that by themselves. But that was kind of like my first impressions there and kind of where I've been spending a lot of time.
Yeah. And what about you, Adam? How are you feeling about the models right now?
Yeah, I like to break it up. I've got, for planning, Opus 4.5. I've done enough tests with, I think, Codex 5.2 now to say I'm Opus 4.5 all the way. Debugging, though, I do feel like there's a bit more benefit from using Codex 5.2, like on extra high. I hadn't actually used high until you recommended it, or extra high, Eric, until you recommended it. I don't know. It is definitely awesome when you're trying to like figure out some weird nuanced edge case and track through the code. I think it does a great job there. Refactoring, I'd also say Codex maybe gets the slight edge there. I think it does a really good job doing that. I will say though, it is slower than I would like. So a lot of the times in my daily like coding, it's Opus 4.5, but for debugging, refactoring, stuff that I don't really care, I'd rather take a little bit longer to have done more right the first time, I'm a Codex 5.2. I'd be curious how that aligns with how you're using it, Eric.
Yeah, so I've been going around doing different models, different uses. So my current thinking is Opus 4.5 is the most ergonomic to talk to. Like, and I think you all can agree, like, it's just way easier to talk to. And sometimes, it depends on the time of day. My prompts lack a little bit of precision. And if you give a prompt that lacks, too much precision to Codex, it will run off for 20 minutes and not do anything that you asked, and it'll do whatever it interpreted. Like I had an example the other day where I had a spec and I was like, build the spec. And then Codex spent 20 minutes like thoroughly like fleshing out my markdown document. And I was like, bro, this is not what I wanted. Like it's partly my fault, but like, that's kind of the stuff that you get from it. But what I'm finding a lot is that like a big part of the issue with Codex models is that they're very much like, I need to read everything that there is to read about this thing, and then it reasons, and then that's why you've got like an hour gone. But what I find that works well, and this is partly back to how I've been working for like a while with repo prompt, is I have the model kind of figure out what context matters. It builds that context, and then once I have the context, I can just prompt in a chat, GPT 5.2 or Codex, and it'll answer in 30 seconds, and it'll give me that deep analysis that I'd expect from the model. But it already has all the context, so it doesn't need to go find it. It saves so much time. You get very similar analysis, probably better sometimes because the context windows are so clean and tight. Find that's just like a really good way. And then like for me, Opus is my orchestrator. I talk to it, it talks to Codex for me, and then I have good results. And if I have a detailed plan, Codex all the way just runs it through, and then if I know exactly what it needs to do, it's gonna run through and not skip anything. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I think on this topic of sorry, what was that, Adam? I want to hear your last thoughts there.
Can I add one additional model
Of course,
to the mix here? So there are 3 main models that I use.
Mm-hmm.
The third one might surprise you, but it's Composer 1.
Really?
I love the speed of that model, and I love being able to use that to. And Ray, I got to give you credit for this because you called it like context priming, and I've actually taken that, and Composer 1 is just fantastic for that. You can sit and kind of have a conversation with it, build it out, and then flip it over to a slower model like GPT 5.2, Codex or something, and then you're off to the races. So kind of similar to what you're saying, but really those are my 3 major models that I'm using right now. But Composer 1 may not be the most popular, but the speed of that thing is just so nice, man.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, I think to that, because I've been spending a lot of time in Cursor. They just launched their like sub agents type of thing, so it took them a while to do that, and other people have been doing it in Claude Code. For me, is because of Composer, I've been able to go like read through lots of files. So you can make a / command called the console, and this is something that Ian, one of the developers on that agent, actually kind of put as a prompt. And what it does, it just spins off n of whatever you want, if you need to. And it just goes through, and the agent at the very beginning, Opus, will then take that instructions and say, okay, maybe I need to read all these different files. And so it's sort of like in the repo prompt fashion, like it spins off and has one task to go read the file, figure out what it does. And so those windows are in the separate context, and then it spits it back up to the agent and says, okay, here's all these relevant information. And when you see them working in parallel super fast and reading and grepping through files, and it's like super, super massive. And so, yeah, they've made significant improvements to that. I feel like for reading files, which I've been super impressed from the agent perspective. So I'm very biased because I've spent so much time in there. I need to kind of spread my wings a little bit and try some other agents to see how's that looking like and what's the speed looking like also from Claude Code or Codex. And I don't know if, who's been able to adopt this, and also repo prompt, right? Because repo prompt, you're using what model underneath the hood to kind of, how are you going through the files? I'm really curious here.
Yeah, so my flow is a little slow to get running because I still use Codex. I use Codex Medium to map the territory, build the context, and it's a little different than what you're doing, Ray, because like the way I work with it is that like a normal sub agent, the way that it works is it will kind of go read a bunch of files and then summarize its findings back to the main agent. But what I'm doing is I have Codex kind of map the files, try and find like second order files, like if this is relevant, kind of put that in for a budget, and then it's like a built context window that I can hand off to an analysis model. And then doing it that way, like you do all that work, it has the full context to think about. It's not like reasoning on like summaries of context, it's reasoning on the actual context, and then that way you get like really crazy results. But it is going to be slower. Like I'm finding I'm going to be able to swap out different models for that like context building part. But man, Codex is so thorough at doing it and hitting like a budget of tokens like on the head, like right, nailed it down. So I find that's really good because it can like pull in sub files. Anyway, it's a lot. It's really cool. But there's a lot to explore. Everyone's got these different ways of working, and I think that's like a really interesting part of the space right now, where like there's different models, different workflows, there's different trade-offs with latency and quality, and you got to find what works for you. So we're in this space right now where everything's kind of changing quick, and I think like it's a good spot to jump into what are people doing for orchestration? Because I think there's a lot of experimentation going on right now. So, Ray, you're talking a lot about, having really detailed specs. And I think, a lot of folks are kind of going in this workflow a little bit. So I want to know, like, are you experimenting a little bit with these kind of different tools for task management, or you're kind of still manually like handing off, subtracts for different tasks? Like, what are you doing right now, Ray?
Yeah, I've been sort of on purposely avoiding some of the bigger mainstream tools to like really understand the inputs and outputs of these models, and have sort of derived my own workflow. And it's actually kind of simple. It's literally just one plan file inside of Cursor. And so Cursor basically does this trick in the markdown file. At the very top, they'll have YAML, and the YAML will have these to-dos. And it doesn't generate generally enough to-dos for me to be really satisfied. So I then give it an additional prompt to generate more to-dos and actually kind of split out the work in phased sequences of work, and then parallelizable if it can as well. And so once it kind of does that, and like these are series of prompts that I give it, and I've now turned those into slash commands. And so I've created an orchestrator slash command. And so the orchestrator slash command will basically just take, like my text of whatever I want to achieve. And then you'll actually start to hand that off to another, slash command or another type of thing. And so the model will then take a look saying, do I have the information I need? I can run this slash command to go do some investigation and launch the console. And so they would launch 10 subagents inside of Cursor, and then do the work that it needs to grab the information back, gather some context, and then it makes another decision using another slash command. So these were all these different prompts that I was feeding it in by hand. I just now put them as slash commands. And in the orchestrator itself, as one agent run, it's kind of managing and looking at that type of stuff. And so I just say, hey, now that it has the plan, just go ahead and execute it. And so it generates the plan in these phased manner. It'll, launch different subagents. And so what's crazy now is that each of those, slash commands or whatever, the things you can define for subagents can run models. So I can say, I don't need Opus to run. I want Codex to run. And so these are the things I was doing by hand and managing chats. Now I don't have to have as many chat windows open, and I can kind of go back and see what's happening. And so as it finishes the task, it will just, mark the YAML file back as, complete. That's all. And so it's not like beads. It's not this external thing. It's all there in the code base. And because there's one agent orchestrator, it's just managing that type of thing by itself. My goal is to basically do like my full soccer game I did in 12 days, but just basically through one big, spec file that I would just give it. And so, I would basically, kind of rewinding back, if we're kind of think about this again, now that I've kind of explained a little bit of the architecture, it's like the first conversation I would have would basically start a new chat, and that would just be an architecture skill. So that's just a back and forth conversation, trying to really nail down what my stack is, everything that I really need to do in a lot of detail. And that's usually around, like, it can be 500 lines to several thousand lines, depending on how deep I want to go. And if I'm satisfied with it, and then, that's kind of what I hand off to the orchestrator, and then the orchestrator will figure out all the phased work that we need to do, and then kind of work on those types of chunks and pieces. And so that's kind of where I'm looking at things. And right now I'm just, I'm not having the go full YOLO yet, but just having the work get checked in, having, stuff kicked off for review, and everything that I was just doing by hand, I'm just starting to automate basically through slash commands. And those are what other agents can really pick up, because, they're really good at that. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a few keywords in there. I just want to clarify a little bit for the folks who are not familiar. We live in a little bit of a bubble about like a lot of these tools. So you mentioned like you're not using beads. People don't know what beads are. And I think it's good to explain that a little bit. What is beads? Beads is like Jira for AI agents. And it's just basically a way to like have tasks broken down. You have blockers. You have like, so you break them down into these small units of work. And then the idea is that you figure out like the order that beads have to do, what can be done in parallel, what can't. And so you take a big spec and you hand that and break that down into beads. So I don't personally use beads. I know some people do. The issue with the canonical beads code base is that it's completely vibe coded, and it is growing like a malignant mass. Like it is just growing. It's like, last I checked, it was like 250,000 lines of code. So you're like, why is it so many lines of code for a task manager? It's a good question. So that's beads, and it's interesting because Claude Code recently shipped tasks, which they took heavy inspiration from beads. And basically they're these like small files that are like units of work that you can have sub agents kind of reference, pick up on, and do in parallel. So there's a lot of direction, a lot of inspiration going on there. I'm curious, Adam, like, last we chatted, you were much more like human in the loop workflows. I'm curious if you've adopted any of these tools since then, or if you're like kind of just keeping your workflows.
Yeah, I mean, primarily just keeping my workflows. I will say I have done some experimentation just because I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it's useful to jump in and try to understand what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
One that I ended up trying is a project I resurrected, which the idea was, can I have AI take a general concept and build a game design doc, then orchestrate the prototype such that the AI actually simulates the entire back and forth of the game, then
Wow.
ultimately builds the game into something that's usable. So I have been playing around with that, using a combination of different models and things. Some interesting results. The coordination between agents is very complicated to get
Mm-hmm.
right, but it is fun watching them. Give them a general idea of a game that you want, them coming up with a game design doc for it, and then doing a prototypical like playthrough of the game and I've got everything logged out, so you can kind of see all the turns and to make sure like all the conditions and everything meet, and then
That's
actually
really
trying to
cool.
turn it into a game. So I think there's some like, to your point last time, Eric, there's some practical stuff. It's a lot of work. It's not like an
Mm-hmm.
easy thing to pull off, but there's some
Yeah.
practical things that I think could happen here. Still on the fence of, in real production software, it's really hard to make that stuff work, but it is super
But
cool.
yeah.
So that's where I'm
Yeah.
at now.
Yeah. I mean, just on that note, like, I want to comment a little bit about my last 2 weeks. So I was working a lot, and I was writing a lot of code, and I was having trouble reviewing it, and so I built actually my own like deep review tool that I shipped now in repo prompt, and that's been helping me kind of keep up on like the code that's generated. But the thing that I've noticed is that like even with the best models, even with Codex, like they're so prone to doing things that are like if you overgenerate, you're going to end up with some code that's suboptimal, and you have bad patterns in your code. And then even the best models, they'll take those patterns and they'll propagate them throughout your code base. And so you have to catch them and basically notice when these bad patterns are there, and take the moment to delete bad code and stop these patterns from spreading further. And so you have to kind of still pay attention, like what code is getting generated. And then at some point you ask yourself, okay, like I generated this huge spec. Oh, I didn't read that like one part there, but the agents really took it to heart, and they wrote like 1,000 lines of code for this like system that actually doesn't need to exist at all. And then you have a bunch of complexity around that system that doesn't need to exist. And yeah, your code works, but like then you have all this extra stuff that needs to be handled. So like we're still in a place where the agents don't really know what they're building. They're building what you tell them. They make sure it works, but then that's kind of the end of it. So it's your job to kind of pay attention to that. So
I want
something
to
worth noting.
just talk a little bit more on some of the tooling I'm using to try to get signals in and try to understand them better. As far as like, I'm like as a solo developer, I didn't realize how important it is to like have like and understand linting, and I'm still learning
Mm-hmm.
about this. But it's just
Mm-hmm.
kind of, I guess there's a difference between like a signal that you get from a linter, which says like I have this type of thing, and I guess you can make patterns from them, versus like signal you get from a like a compiler or a language, like protocol type of thing that says, hey, you're missing a semicolon here, that type of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I think these agents are starting to get those signals coming into them. And I feel like I think that's probably important context to it. And I'm just kind of wanting to understand if you've done any exploration there, Eric, because I know you do a lot of that stuff with repo prompt in general. And
Mm-hmm.
how is that flooding the context window too much? How should maybe people think about them? Also, Adam, like coding practices that you're doing now, and like maybe why you don't want to go full YOLO yet, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, so for me personally, like I find if you had too many layers of like, here's like, oh, like these LSPs are publishing every message or all this stuff, you very do quickly fill the context window, and sometimes they're not configured right, and so you got to really be careful what you're putting in. And I find at the planning step, you want none of this. You want like the minimal, like just cleanest context window you can to reason about what it is to be done. When you're actually implementing and iterating, that's when you really want these verification loops to kind of be in there. And you can have rules, like you mentioned, like the linter, there's like prettier, but there's like tools you can put. Like I saw the droid readiness thing, and if you're not familiar, so the factory droid harness, they published this ready agent readiness tool to help you evaluate how good your code base is at like self-verifying and stuff. And one of the rules they added was like, oh, like you don't have any checks to make sure that your files are getting too large and they should be broken up. And I think stuff like that is like just interesting to kind of consider, like how atomically testable are your pieces of code, like what's the test surface there. Just stuff to think about. And I'm curious, Adam, are you investing in a lot of this verification loop stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I would say 100%. When the bigger the company you get into, I've learned they spend a lot of time getting that right, so that when a developer comes in and loads up a AI IDE, like it's already got a lot of that stuff built into it. On your point where you were making before, Eric, you're spot on. Like I've actually, you'll talk to someone, they're like, man, AI sucks at writing code. And there's sometimes they're not wrong. Like sometimes it writes bad patterns, or it does duplicative work in a file where that work is already done. And you're like, hey, just use that function. Don't make a new one. So there is that human in the loop. And now we have to be in the loop less than we had to be a year ago, but we still need to be in the loop. And that's where, like, I'm pretty skeptical about the agent swarms and how that stuff plays out. But I don't know. I still think there's something really cool there from a research perspective. And 10 years from now, that might be the way things work. It's just right now, focused on writing good code and getting good stuff out into people's hands.
Yeah, I think, the risk right now is that things are good enough that it's very easy to get ahead of your skis and kind of over delegate and kind of over parallelize. And if you don't invest, because it's like you said, it's hard work to get this stuff working reliably. You have to invest a lot of time up front if you want to have like a huge deployment run and burn like trillions of tokens for a week, like Cursor did for their stuff. Like it's very hard to do well and reliably. You can get really interesting results doing it if you really spend that time. But like most people, one, they don't have the budget to do it. And two, they don't really understand the scope of what they're doing. So it's probably best not to over index on that stuff and just take a step back and like, just like the fact that you're using these tools at all, like Ari is great. Like, try and think a little bit about like, what you're doing, be intentional with your work, be intentional with what the models are doing. And I think that's going to serve you really well. All right, like we gone a lot on this. I wanted to take a moment to just highlight Kimi K2.5 that just dropped. And I know, Ray, you spent a little moment with it. You built some websites. What are your initial impressions of the model?
It's a damn good front-end web designer. It's super impressive. I got to try it on Kimi K2's website, and they have a little thing on the sidebar that says, generate a website. And I basically just give it a video of a website on Dribbble. And I said, hey, let's just generate a rate limited podcast. And I gave it some of our brand guidelines for rate limited and kind of who we are and stuff like that. And, it basically chose the colors and followed the video and went to the website on Dribbble as well on top of the reviewing the video. And so the agent that launches on their website with Kimi's.com's website is you can see it. It almost works like Manus. So it's launching like an agent and it's like actually reviewing the video like in a container of some sort. And then it's doing work. And then I see it then generating images in like a separate container. And so it's generating the little assets that it's going to be using for our website. And it's going through this like in a very procedural way. And it's kind of going down. It's like getting ready to publish the website. And I just said I wanted it in one HTML file. And, it basically fix some linting errors and fix some other errors. And then boom, it like published the website. And it kind of blew us away. We were just like, it's crazy, and it had like all the little details for hover effects and everything. And the other part that blew me away was the mobile view. So it looks like a modern, like coded website. I would say it's really hard to tell that it was like vibe coded per se. There may be some smells here and there, but for the most part, like on mobile view, when you're scrolling, has like little blurs and animations in. And it's not overdone. It's just done right. I thought it really blew me away with a lot of details, even our fake sign up forms and the color choices and the SVG patterns that are overlaid in an HTML file site. Was pretty damn impressive. It just also launched inside of Droid. So I gave it the exact same prompt, and it didn't have those details in mobile, like with the little hamburger menu and the blur stuff. It still had a similar looking site. It looked pretty good, but the better one seemed to be inside of Kimi, because maybe I think their agents can run for longer or do multiple calls, and they may have some skills or other system prompts that are probably preloaded inside of their website. And for those who are wondering, if you go to Kimi.com, for anyone who, if they're concerned about privacy and sending their data, obviously you should do your diligence and understand that, where you're sending these types of things. And I think the one inside of Droid for the model is just the Fireworks API. And I'm not exactly sure yet. I just saw it show up, but I'll have to follow up and see what's going on with the team, because I'm also trying to figure out, can I load this model locally? Can I do some other things? Can I get the same results? But on the website, it's really impressive. That's only a couple of tests that I've done. It's just generate a website for Kimi K2.5. Yeah.
So I actually saw there was the developer of this thing called Exa Labs, I believe. So he makes Mac Studios coordinate as like a server. He got 2 Mac Studios that were maxed out with 0.5 terabyte of RAM each. So it's a big model. So it's about 10K to get that set up. And it was running at 24 tokens per second. But, that is pretty good for 2 Mac Studios, like running that much. And we were talking last time about, like cost for these tokens. And at 10K, like it's starting to become interesting, because you're getting to a price point where people are going to easily spend 10K in a year on a developer for inference. And if you're able to kind of set that up, that's pretty interesting. That said, there are a lot of electrical costs associated with this. And so depending on where you live, 10K is not the end story there. But, it's worth considering, looking at how this is now and where we'll be. But it does take a lot of RAM, and RAM is in short supply at the moment. So we shall see where that ends up. Curious, Adam, have you had any time to test out Kimi, or any initial thoughts?
Yeah, I have quite a few. First off, I spent about $1,200 last month on AI costs.
Damn.
10K does start to get interesting. So there's a few things about Kimi. Huge fan of the company. Love what they're doing. Moonshot, I think. I love the initial Kimi when it came out. It is a massive model. 2.5, the stuff, Ray, that you've done, the stuff that I've played around with. I've only done it in root code, so I haven't done like a huge amount of it. Does seem very promising. If you look at the token counts on OpenRouter right now, it's at 52.3 billion, and the model just came out very recently. So that is a pretty enormous amount of usage. To put that in perspective, for, let's see, the week of this last week, Grok Code did 141 billion tokens, so it's come down quite a bit. So, I mean, it's coming out of the gate pretty strong. The few posts that I've seen on it are kind of concerning to me, though, because a lot of people are like, hey, this is as good as Opus 4.5. I don't believe that to be the case, personally. But I also want people to be careful, because they were doing a cost analysis, too. Opus 4.5 is more expensive, but a lot of times, especially if you're using it through OpenRouter, most of the providers from Kimi K2.5 do not have any sort of caching capabilities. So your cost will actually go up quicker than you think at that raw token price. Now, if you do the Moonshot AI API directly, you do get cache reading. So it is important. Just keep that in mind, because I've seen that just blow budgets up way quicker on good model.
Yeah.
I'm very curious next week, though, to see if it makes it into the top 10 of programming LLMs on OpenRouter. I have a feeling it's going to probably come in at number 4. That's what I'm predicting.
Interesting. Yeah. It's worth noting with this model that it's priced actually very similar to Gemini Flash 3. And it seems to be a much bigger model than that model. So when you're getting bigger models, there are benefits in terms of long context handling, instruction following, and other things. Gemini Flash 3 is a great model, but it's not comparable exactly to Sonnet 4.5. So if we're getting into that kind of capability tier at this Flash price tier, that's when we get some really interesting results. And I'm curious to see how more providers start hosting it. It's worth noting as well, first week of release with new models, oftentimes providers do have some issues with schemas for tool calling and different things. So, if it's not hosted on the first party server, you might get some issues or degraded performance, and it's worth waiting a little bit to really give it a good shot and see how it feels afterwards. So interesting times for open source models. I'd love to see the progress, the pricing, and it's putting some heat on the Western labs, which is really cool. So, Adam, you wanted to talk a little bit about agent harnesses and like, what are we building on? If you're a company building in this space, there are different options right now. And one of the big options that people are turning to is the Claude Agent SDK. As you get the benefits of like a nice sandbox. You get to just define your tools, and then the agent loop is kind of taken care of for you. But it is kind of locked into their ecosystem, and there are some ways with proxies, but it's a little hacky. I'm curious, like you've been building, tooling like this. I want to know what your thoughts are as a builder on top of this SDK, and like, what we're going with agents and tools as a business.
Yeah, and not everyone may agree with me on this, but I get very nervous being locked into an ecosystem, especially one as fast-paced and moving as this one. Now, don't get me wrong, Agent SDK is great. For those of you that aren't aware, you can kind of think about it like an ecosystem built on top of Claude Code, with Claude Code being the actual agent executor. There are pieces that you kind of plug in the Agent SDK, so you can do external tools, so MCPs mostly. You can have your own skills. Skills you can kind of think of like workflow definitions is the way I like to kind of prescribe those. So if you are building on the Agent SDK, you narrow your scope of development down to really the tools that you need, the orchestration of those tools, so the prompting around that, and the skills and the workflows that need to be executed. And Claude has great like code execution. It has built-in, I want to say it has built-in web search. If not, it was coming soon because I was playing around with that.
It does.
Yeah. So in the Agent SDK piece, so yeah, there's things like that you just get out of the box. It's really good, but to me it's a really scary thing to lock. Let's say you work at like a Salesforce or an Apple. It would be very hard for me to want to productionalize something on Agent SDK for my customers, because I'd be so beholden to their roadmap, what they're building, what they're updating, and not be able to take advantage of other models that come in, not be able to actually jump on some new paradigm that came out without relying on, Claude making that update. So to me, it's an interesting challenge, I think, that companies have to kind of wrestle with, because on one hand, you probably could ship a lot quicker if you launch on Agent SDK. But I think the downside effect of that, of being locked into that ecosystem, even though I would say Claude is probably number one right now, and Claude Code is probably one of the better orchestrators right now, it's just hard to see that into the future as being the case. I don't know. I'd be really curious what you guys think. I'd be nervous if I was a decision maker making those decisions.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, a big thing about it is like, it depends on what you're doing with the agent. Like Claude Code is a coding harness, and it needs like a sandbox execution because you're running bash commands and all that stuff. And that bash commands are the thing, like I'm building my own agent through, repo prompt with all the tools. And it's the one thing that like gives me a lot of pause to deploy, because it's something you really don't want to mess up. That's where, agents can have like root access, or can do escalated things. That's where like, the bash command is like a doorway to your entire computer. And if you're not isolating that well, you're not handling permissions correctly, the agent can do a lot of damage. So like if a business is not using that runtime, like it doesn't need to kind of run on the computer and it doesn't need bash, then there's not as much of a need for all that complexity. But if it is, that's when you got to really be careful. So that's kind of like my big thing there. I'm curious, Ray, like, have you experimented with Agent SDK, or have you tried building anything yourself, like building your own harnesses or anything like that?
No, I mostly got distracted by ClawdBot. And so that's kind of my gateway in, because ClawdBot is already sort of something that's pre-built for me. And
yeah, we'll get into that one a little bit
as well. Yeah,
I do want to. Yeah.
Your guys' conversation has got me interesting. So from someone from that perspective, I'm kind of curious, because I'm starting to see business use cases that are pretty obvious. So people like chatbots. People like to just message. People like to feel like they have their own chief of staff or some person that they can just kind of talk with. But that also knows about their business, right? It's just like, because I just set one up in Slack. I guess you could do that with the Agent SDK, but does it take a lot to spin up memories and things? And how do you guys think about these things? Or
if
you
you
just
think
keep
about
them very isolated?
we'll get into how, CloudBot, MaltBot does memory, because I read a little bit about that and I want to dive into that. But at the end of the day, like what these agents are doing is just file management. So, you got tools and files, and if you have those and a loop that the model runs through, it can do everything it needs to. And a lot of that loop is actually built into the like API provider now. So like if you use, now there's like the open responses, which is like the OpenAI's response API that's been like standardized for the industry, which I think is really great. And you have like the Claude API provider, which is a little different. Like basically, you're just defining tools. You're giving the model a prompt, and it has a chain, and the model can decide to call tools, and it just does things. That's pretty much all it is, really. So if you're setting up your harness to kind of use that provider, the harness is doing very little except exposing the tools. And that's why I wanted to just bring up just like a side note here on the Pi agent, which goes by the shitty coding agent, because I think it's like an interesting project where they are very minimal. Their out of the box experience is super Spartan. But like it's so extensible. Like every little thing you see, every pixel in the terminal is configurable. You can add layers, windows, you can add your own tools, you can remove tools, you can do whatever you want. And it's so customizable, in fact, that this is actually what the MaltBot or ClawdBot was built on. And that's why I think it's an interesting open source alternative to the agent SDK. If you're building in the space, is you want something super configurable, very minimal out of the box that you can really shape in the way that you want. And you have the full source code too that you can kind of customize. I think if you're deploying agents, it's important to be able to like control that part of it. So that's really interesting. And okay, so we got a little bit of that stuff. We have to talk about ClawdBot, MaltBot. Ray obviously has done it. I want to know, Adam, have you played with it? Your thoughts are too, because Ray's going to go deep, and I think we just got to get ready for that one.
Yeah, we should I know very loosely about kind of what's happening there, so I'm very curious to hear from Ray and you on this.
Okay, so just before Ray dives into his whole experience, I just want a little preface what it is. So if you're not familiar, this agent blew up, on X. It's blown up out of the bubble as well. Like a lot of people are setting it up. What it is, it's basically just, a coding agent with a ton of connectors. So you can plug in WhatsApp, Telegram, Slack, Discord, whatever you want. You can set it up on your personal machine. You can set it up on the cloud. You can send it text messages. It can code up its own tools if it wants to. It can customize itself. And it remembers your interactions, so it's able to run, write down what it learned, and it has different tiers of memory. We can get a little bit more on that later, but the main thing is that it's running, and then it has this other piece that is pretty important that most coding agents don't have, is that it's got a heartbeat. So basically, what is a heartbeat? It's like a command that runs to the agent periodically to kind of check in, like, hey, like, maybe you should check in on what's going on. So, every like 30 minutes, every hour or so, it can go ahead, read some files, check what's the user doing. Do I have any new messages? New messages can interrupt it as well and fling it open. But, it can check on some stuff and see. So it's able to be proactive and not just reactive, which I think is a big step. Okay, so I've given my spiel, what it is. Ray, you've gotten into it. You've gone into the deep end. Tell us, what's it been like living in the future?
Is it living its future? I think it's been a little scary, to be honest. I kind of waited for a little bit. And my friend AJ, while we were walking on a live stream, said, have you heard about this? I was like, no. And then we sat in a park bench or outside and literally set it up on an EC2 instance. And it was easier to set up than I was thinking, but I didn't want it on my personal machine because of the different security implications and so forth. So after kind of doing that and getting it configured, it seemed to just be really smart as far as like a chatbot. I just had it hooked up in the Discord. I was like, oh, that's cute. People can ask it questions. But then I started giving it superpowers, and I gave it the, EXA MCP. And I was like, hey, you now have access to this. Go start like answering people's questions in the Discord or whenever people come up. So people would ask me questions, and I would just it was called like YOLO bot in my Discord. And so it's like, wow, wait, hold on. I didn't have to like code up this thing or tell Claude Code to make this bot, but then it has these capabilities I can keep plugging in, if I wanted it to do other things or do any other stuff. So then I said, okay, let me see if I can set this up for my business. Cause I have a Slack, like a business Slack account, and I have an ops person. And so what if we make a chief of staff as a position in our business where that's the person that's going to interface and kind of start to get the context between everything? Because I spend a lot of time telling my ops person kind of what I'm doing or whatever's going on or what deals we should chase and various stuff. And so we have like literally a Notion thing. We have a Google Sheets thing. We have Pages. We have all these different pieces of the business everywhere. And I was like, I don't want to give it access to everything right now because I'm just, I don't know what's going to happen. And so I've just kind of been feeding it into it. I just set up the bot in my Slack, like a different one, and I've given it some capabilities. And I said, oh, you have access to the X API now. And so here it is. And, I have a little environment variable set up. And so it just started going and reading my sheet of all my different posts that I have and started getting like updated statistics. And it's like, hey, we're going to work on a partnership with this person. Can you just make a dashboard for Mel really quick? And it's like, cool. It goes off and like, a couple minutes later comes back. It's like, boop, here's a full dashboard with all your metrics. And here's where people are mentioning things. And it's like, oh, what else can it do? And so we've been kind of going crazy with this, and all it has is capability right now. It's like it wrote a script for the X API. And then I said, can you then like get my skill file for how I do research on companies? Because I have like this really deep research due diligence skill that sits inside of Claude. It's currently in my own Claude Code projects, and I wanted to pull that out. So I just grabbed that MD file and put it inside, and told the agent, like, here you go. You have this new capability. Can you just start use this and just do a quick deep research task? Yeah. So what this agent does is now taking this deep research task and then uses like my guidelines for how I do things. Because this is kind of, I would just literally give it to my ops person's, the output of it. But now she just says, hey, this is the name of the company. Can you go look this stuff up? And like there was like some code review companies that it looked up because we were trying to understand, the space a little bit better. And so she has no clue of some of these technical terms, but she says, wow, wait, this company had a bunch of security breaches recently. And then they're trying to reach out. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, what was that? So like we're both in the same Slack, work group, and it's
Right
like
on.
putting out the report. I was like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. It's like, I see why
Absolutely.
they reached out, because they want to, whatever they want to do. And so that type of stuff just start to get me these more light bulb moments. And so I'm giving it more capabilities. And apparently, you can set up like an OAuth. You can make an app, like a Google app, and then you can OAuth yourself, into it, and then give the agent its own little like, app. Like basically, it makes a little mini app for itself. And then it has like API access like you would normally with the user. And then you can grant it privileges to get access to certain files or various things that you want. And so now it's kind of really made me think about the whole explosion of things. It's like, okay, one of the things that Apple did really well with the iPhone, because it's just like, Linux and stuff like, or Unix on a phone, and even Mac OS in general, it's like how they thought about the security app architecture, because, you can't install like malware on a phone, right? It just, there's a secure boot chain from the hardware all the way up to the OS layer. And, there's just all these like certs and like, like this whole thing, even just booting the device is kind of insane. But, there's probably someone who's trying to think through this a little bit. And there's got to be some type of agent OS system that is probably going to be designed a similar way. And it's gotten me really thinking about this, because I want to have this as some type of business use case. And somebody from Founders Inc. literally spun off an idea of this. And so she's making a UI for it. And it looks like a really beautiful like chat UI. And it like has these little connectors that are really clean, like OpenAI. And it's like, connect your Notion, connect your these things. And she's focused on businesses. And so these businesses are going to want these capabilities. And it's like, oh, that's super clean. So it's, it just from my small use case, I haven't even gone crazy with like morning reports and doing all these other things. I'm just kind of scratching the surface here, and also mindful of security as well. I don't want to give it too much access, but I was just already really impressed with how much the models can do with this baseline type of thing, and then the ability to build tools for itself if it needs them, and like accomplish a task.
Yeah, I was at a conference a few months back, and talking to a lot of companies out there, a lot of them are scared to death of the CLI tools in general.
Yeah.
And this seems to like just add fuel onto that. It's like, not only do you have root access to your entire system, but you have access to my social media accounts, my Discord, like you were talking about. That's so interesting. The security implications of this are phenomenal to me. Like what's actually going to happen here.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think it's the most important thing. So on X, there was some security researchers posting. So there's a couple things here. So first of all, This is exciting to a lot of people. A lot of non-technical people are setting it up, and so a lot of them are setting them up on the cloud. And it seems like there's a lot of people who are not used to setting up servers on the cloud, and they are putting up basically an open server, basically an open door. And because of the way the internet is structured with different companies, there are companies that will scan the entire internet for these open doors and find them, and they could put them in a list. And then so someone should publish that list. Like, here, look, there's like 950 servers that are set up with ClawdBot that you can go ahead and find because they're all indexed and they all have their unique signature of ClawdBot. So because you're using an off-the-shelf tool that is popular, it's got a nice flashing sign that this is ClawdBot. And people are just able to walk in and just basically take whatever is in that server. Like, if whatever you put it there, it's all accessible. So you have to really be careful about like how you're configuring your security there, because that's very important. And the other part is prompt injection. So these models, they are susceptible to coercion and because of how you're kind of feeding them input. Like, you'll send them a command via WhatsApp. Well, if someone else is able to send a message to your WhatsApp and they know that you have ClawdBot set up, maybe they'll know that they can prompt ClawdBot to leak your credentials or leak some things and do some things, especially if they got internet access, they got your files, they got all this stuff. So you have to be very careful. And then there's another surface area, is these connectors and skills, where there was someone who showed, hey, I can actually supply chain attack and get the most popular skill on the site and put a prompt injection vulnerability in the skill that people will run and will do these things that are terrible. So there's all these surface areas where there's a lot of risk in terms of what the model is able to do. And it's kind of a function of how useful it is, right? So like, the more useful it is, probably the more risky it is. And like, we're going to have to balance this line. And I think that's why like this kind of tool needs to be sort of open sourced and experimental, because it's really hard to put your name on it as a big company with shareholders, because the risks are enormous. So it is interesting that someone did it that got a lot of attention and are able to ship with it. And yeah, I think right now the only thing, if you're using this is the cost, because it seems like, the best model for this that's most resilient to prompt injection is Opus, but it's the most expensive model. And Anthropic is cutting down. Last time we talked about open code getting shut off, like, they are coming after the people running these ClawdBots as well. So it seems like you have to look at other models, and it's kind of fortuitous that this Kimi K2.5 just came out, and I'm curious to see how well it performs in these circumstances, because I think models like that are going to be really interesting for running these personal assistants. Any other thoughts, Adam, on all of this? Like, I want to hear, are you looking to set one up yourself, or?
I don't know, man. I typically am not that scared to try stuff on the AI side. But I start getting nervous when I open it up AI to have access to things that I want to have control over. So
Yeah.
it's probably unlikely that I would set up a ClawdBot to do some of the stuff that I see people doing with it. But it is pretty cool. I like that we're pushing this forward. I also am very scared for all the non-technical people that are setting these up and installing connectors and whatnot without fully understanding it. Yeah, I think the security researchers that are pushing on this, they deserve all the praise, honestly, because all the things you talked about were the things that immediately went through my head. Like, man, I could see people hijacking someone's account that's connected to you, Ray, and then sending a message and then like having something happen, and then now all of a sudden, I don't know all the paths that could happen, but it just makes me very nervous. How about you, Eric? Are you going to set one up?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done it yet, but I think it's important to me. Like, I'm running a small business. I think there's some utility in doing that. I've just been trying to think through like, what is the actual thing that I want to provide to it, because definitely don't want this on my personal computer. I do want to figure out what I'm going to give it. I would love to have it answer emails, but I also am scared to death of it answering my emails. So it's like, like they're like the proportionality of risk and usefulness is there, and you got to really like measure what you do. I did hear someone set up something called agent mail, and that's really cool because you can give your AI agent its own inbox that's like separate from yours, and you can have some permissions of forwarding certain emails over and letting it kind of answer some emails and doing some stuff for you. So I think like more and more, like, we're gonna need to build tools that are bespoke for it in its own containers with some own read access. It's just a lot of investment and time to get that done right, and that's why, again, kind of like putting it off, busy with other things, but definitely something to explore.
Yeah, I have a friend that was talking to me about doing it with LinkedIn. Basically trying to like go through. Say you own a business and you're targeting like 50 to 100 companies. You monitor what they're posting, and then tee up post basically to respond to them and respond to the thing. Like stuff like that's interesting to me.
Yeah.
But it is also like you're giving them access to your LinkedIn account. So I mean, that's your reputation on the line there. If something goes awry, it's tricky to me. The whole thing is tricky.
Yeah. Very tricky. Yeah. Any closing thoughts on this, Ray? Anything you're looking to try on?
I think for this, kind of that similar concept, Adam, and I think maybe how when you hire an employee, I don't give them full admin access. I just kind of say, you're basically an observer, or you have access to this. And I think I think secretly all these tools are turning us into like DevOps engineers, people who could write good documentation, API specs, and also, think about security in a funny way, because this has brought me back to, why, certain products do so well from a security standpoint, and what has stood the test of time. So I'm spending actually reviewing back the Apple white papers and kind of going back to, what are some of the core concepts here? They're actually kind of simple, actually. But then how does that apply here in these use cases, and what can I think through? So definitely we'll get some updates as I learn, because I feel like the models are very capable, just, with very, very minimal instructions, in good and bad ways, right? So I think I want to try to figure out how this can be, something that can be done for good. And hopefully these companies can learn something from them and incorporate them in their products, because I'll be signing up for, the next Claude update or whatever, the ChatGPT, what if they can have something amazing like this, I'll take all my money.
Yeah. I think it's the time to just lean in though and try and experiment with this stuff, but like pay attention to what you're setting up, and pay attention to what your models are doing. I think that's just the common theme here, is you're using them for code or for personal assistance. Like, you don't want to just kind of lean back and let it do everything. We're not quite there yet. Like, these things are chaotic. I don't know when they will be like super robust, like if ever. Probably some point in the next 50 years they will be. The next 5 years, who knows? Like, the times are weird, but you can do a lot with them right now, and you just have to pay attention, and lean in. Yeah, that's the big takeaway, I think.
Yeah, I've always had this idea of I like the personal assistant idea, and I like the idea of me being able to schedule like prescribed tasks that I want my personal assistant to do at certain times, and giving them just enough access to stage the things that I want done, but I still have to review to actually publish or do things on it. So I think there's probably some middle ground here, and probably people are already building that stuff. But to your point, Ray, I totally agree. I think you narrow the scope, but I'll go back to, if you have a CLI coding tool on your computer, they have access to everything on your machine. And if it's not open source, we don't really know exactly what's happening. You could try to you could kind of monitor network traffic. And sometimes you see some weird network traffic happening, but you can't really you don't really know what that is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the CLIs can be invoked headlessly too. And if you have malware on your computer, they might use your existing install to do some things you don't want.
And also to add printers. So like, a lot of people don't know this, but some of the old like HP printers are like, as soon as they show up on your network, people start injecting. Okay, now I just told everyone the whole secret, but like, this is something to be aware of. Like, you could have an old printer on your network and that actually has malware on it. You have no clue. It's actually
man.
Yeah. So
that's crazy.
FYI. Yeah.
Be careful. Unplug your printers, folks.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, that's funny.
Well, look, I think that is a great place to stop for today. And it was really great going over all of this with you. And please let us know, like, are you all setting up these personal assistants? How are you using them? Are you building your own agents? Are you using Agent SDK? Are you running swarms, or are you kind of sitting in the loop? Let us know what you're doing. And obviously tell us what models you're using as well. We want to know. Maybe next time we'll have a mailing list set up too, with Coded by Kimi K2 that Ray just vibed up right now. So we'll see how that goes. Let us know.
All right. I think also for folks who are tuned in, make sure you just log into Spotify, because we're trying to be the #1 AI podcast for real. So every 5-star review actually does help, and it actually boosts the algo. And actually, you'll be very surprised. Even, I think there's 2,000 people who subscribe to us on YouTube. We're super thankful for that. If you also log into just Spotify and just start, an Apple podcast and just, 5-star review it. It'd be kind of funny if we just go from like wherever we're at right now to just like #1 overnight, just from like 40 or 100 reviews or something. Because all of you who've watched or listened, they kind of take that into account. So I know people are listening to on other platforms. And so that's how we're going to make it to #1, folks.
That's great. Wise words. Follow Ray's advice there. Thanks so much, everyone. Wish you all the best and have a great week. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, take care, everybody.